Good afternoon. You got me again. It's good, this, isn't it? If I arrange for Liz to do an installation every Friday, I can stage a complete takeover, can't I? But seriously, that's not really what I want to do. It just so happens that Liz is doing another installation today of an Amara with Pro Stitcher down in South Wales. Down in South Wales for a customer who actually only came to look at the machine about 10 days ago. Made up their mind there and then, and it was just a question of getting a date in the diary, because we've got the machines in stock, we've got several of them tested, ready to go, and so she's doing that installation today because it was the most convenient day. But we're up and running, and hopefully people are online. Walks has helped me out, Mark has helped me out to try and so that I can see the feed on my laptop over here, so hopefully I'll be able to see any comments that come in. I've had very little time to prepare for this afternoon, so this really is on the fly, because I've been out and about as well. I've been up in Yorkshire for the last 2 days, doing some servicing yesterday on a couple of customer machines, and going to visit another customer this morning to fit some electromagnetic channel locks to her Amara. So I've rushed back from Yorkshire and got here just in time and thought, okay, what am I going to talk about? So I thought I would talk about maybe some of the things that I've seen on my visits. So a couple of things really, mainly aimed at those of you who are perhaps new to the machines, but it might also be useful to those of you who've had your machines for a while. But I thought I'd talk about a couple of tips and tricks, but also common fault determination. If your machine's running fine all the time, then there's no issue, is there? But when something goes wrong, how do you approach it? And these machines are industrial grade machines, and they're pretty reliable. But if something goes wrong with your stitching, you need to work out what's happening and why that's happening. And there are some common ones, and it's always best to start with the most common issues first, because even experienced quilters can get things wrong. I was at a class where we had a very experienced quilter who had been using her machine for maybe 10 years, and she was doing a class with us and called me across because she just couldn't get the stitch to form properly. And she had managed to miss out one step on the thread path. She'd never done it before, just couldn't understand what was going wrong, and it was simply that. All of these steps on the thread path are there for a reason, so if you miss one, generally it's not going to work very well. So I'm going to show you some of those things in a moment. Let's just have a look to see who's online over here. So, lots of people already. Di, hello Di. Still in fog in Bristol. I've had some sunshine driving back from Yorkshire this afternoon. Mari in Darwin in Australia. You have stayed up late to watch. I am surprised at you, Mari, really. Just looking at our Facebook Live all the way from Australia there. Sandra in the Netherlands. I'm pleased to see the Dutch got through to the next stage of the Football World Cup as well. England and the USA battled an honourable draw last week, so honours are even between us and Handy Quilter at the moment. But I did live in the Netherlands for a few years and worked there, which was a really great experience. So I have some affinity to the Dutch as well, so I'd like to see them do well. Who else have we got online? Claire, hello Claire, and Joan, hello Joan. Have you been to see that machine yet? Who else we got? Leslie, Ray, hi Ray, and Claire. Oh, Claire will be looking forward to her new machine arriving next week. So we've got another busy week next week. On Monday, I'm installing an Amara in Cambridgeshire, which is the same day that Olivier, another of our engineers, is installing another Amara elsewhere in Cambridgeshire for Claire. And on Tuesday, where am I on Tuesday? I've lost the plot. I'm doing something on Tuesday as well. Oh yes, I'm moving a customer's existing frame, extending it to a longer length, and moving it in their house, I think, as well as servicing the machine at the same time. And then on Wednesday next week, I'm down in Somerset installing another Amara. So things are pretty busy still. We thought we'd caught up with all the orders, but they've still come flooding in, which is great. Thank you for that. And we've had an order already for one of the ex-demo Amaras that I mentioned on Facebook Live last week. So we've still got a couple of those left. If you're interested, I have actually seen an email that somebody else has emailed today to find out about one of the ex-demos. So obviously once they're gone, they're gone. But get in touch if you're interested and I can give you more details. Have another quick look here. Tricia, your machine is due a service in May. When should you start booking? Yeah, that's a good point actually, because the reason I arranged to do the service visits in Yorkshire was that I was going up to the customer in Doncaster, not in Doncaster, somewhere in Derbyshire, in any case. So if we're travelling to a particular part of the country, then it makes sense for us to see if we can do any other jobs in that area. It's efficient for us and it reduces the cost for you, because you can, of course, bring your machine here for service, and that's realistic if you've got one of the smaller machines, a Sweet 16 or a Simply 16. You can book it in with us, and we can do it on the day. It takes about half a day to do a service, generally. But for the larger machines, we prefer to do the servicing on site, because when we do that, we can also pick up on any other questions you might have as well. So that's certainly something that's useful. So often when we're traveling to a particular part of the country, we will say, is there anybody in the area that would like their machine serviced? And then I can give a quote for that work. And if we can fit it in on the same visit, then that's great for everybody involved. So Tricia, and anybody else who thinks their machine is due for a service visit, then just let us know in advance, because then we can plan things around that perhaps and let you know when we're going to be in your area. I guess that gives the, leads to the question of how often do you need to get your machine serviced? Now, with the Handy Quilter machines, the recommendation is every 10 million stitches or 2 years, whichever comes soonest. Now, if you're not using your machine professionally and quilting for other people, it's probably going to take you a while to get to 10 million stitches. So it would generally be the 2-year limit that we would recommend. Now, we don't insist on that. You'll know that all machines sold by Handy Quilter have a 5-year warranty in any case. And we don't insist that you have the service done in order to still have your warranty valid. Your warranty will still be valid. The only proviso to that is that if there's something that happens that we would have picked up at the service and you didn't get it serviced on time, then of course we may have to charge extra in those circumstances. But the machines are very reliable. Those of you who've had your machines for years will know that they're extremely reliable generally, and that even if you don't get them serviced every 2 years, it's generally not an issue. If you are using your machine professionally, you're probably going to do 10 million stitches every 1 or 2 years in any case, and you certainly should get your machine serviced then. One of the ones I did yesterday in Yorkshire was for somebody who quilts for other people. She's got 37 million stitches on her machine now. It's 10 million stitches since her last service. She's kept it very well maintained throughout, and it was all in really good condition. It'll carry on running smoothly. I did have one example of somebody who hadn't had their machine serviced ever, and the machine was 7 years old, and they were using it for quilting for other people, and just one day it seized up because the greases had stopped working, internal components had simply seized. Now, there was no long-term damage, but obviously she couldn't then use her machine at all until it came back to us, and we fixed it and got it back to her. But that's clearly not an ideal situation, particularly if you're using it to run your business. Maybe I'll take the opportunity to say that we are actually planning to offer owners the opportunity of extending their warranty at the end of the 5-year period with a low-cost extended warranty option for even greater peace of mind. So not only do Handy Quilter offer a really good warranty in any case, but we know how reliable the machines are. We have so many users that we can effectively self-insure and offer that as an add-on. And my aim is to try and get something up and running on that by the end of this year. So if your machine is coming up to 5 years old, expect to receive an email from us offering that service to you. It's completely optional, of course, whether you wish to take up on that. But there is such faith that we have in these machines that we're very happy to offer that added peace of mind. Right, so that's servicing. So let us know if you think your machine is due for a service, and we may be able to fit it into a visit if you can't bring it to us. Right, quick look for other comments, and then I'll get back to actually doing some stuff on this Moxie here. Right, so Anne, you're back in Canada. I'm sorry you couldn't make that visit to see us when Stuart was here, and Joyce from the USA is here as well, and we have Jackie. Hi Jackie. Right, so let's talk about basic issues and some common things that we see with new owners, and also a couple of tips for you as well. You'll see on this quilt here, there's a line of stitching in pink here that's been put in place. Now, the throat space of the machine obviously depends on what machine you have. This is the Moxie, it's the smallest machine on the stand-up frame. And I don't know if you can see on the camera here, but I've made 2 marks. This is the furthest back that we can go with the Moxie, and this is the furthest forward. Now, that's 11 inches on the Moxie. So, for instance, if you're doing a pantograph pattern, you can't do anything. I wouldn't even do 11 inches. I would probably restrict myself to a maximum of 8 or 9 inches of a pantograph pattern for the Moxie. Otherwise, you can't get the design in that space. But what you'll notice is the most furthest you can come forward is here. Yet the bar is several inches further on here. And it can be very difficult with one of these stand-up machines when you're new to it to assess where you can finish stitching. You might be doing some free motion work and think you can come further this way because visibly it looks as if you can, but you can't. And the reason that there's some excess space here is so that there is room for the ruler base in front of the needle, and you can then use a ruler more comfortably. That's the only reason they put this space in here. It's actually very useful. But you can't tell where the front edge is that you can carry on stitching to. Now, a tip that I picked up from a customer actually was a really good way of doing that when you're new to the machine and you haven't really got a good feeling for where that forward point is after you've basted down the sides of the quilts to stabilize it, you can put a basting stitch in by pulling the machine right forward, putting in a very long stitch, and then just moving it all along. And you'll see here, that's what we did when this was, I've moved the quilt on, which is why this is further up. But this then gives you a visual reference for exactly where you can free motion quilt to. It's a really useful tip, I think, for a new owner of the machines. And you can easily take that stitching out then as well. I was just going to talk about one product here, actually, because we talked about this product during lockdown. This is called a seam fix tool. And unfortunately, during lockdown, we couldn't get hold of these. They were like gold dust. It's only £6. We do stock them. And it's a very useful tool that is it's got a seam ripper in one end. I'm sure you've already got plenty of seam rippers for taking out these stitches. But it's got a rubberized end to the device here, and just by rubbing that over the stitching, it comes out really easily. So it's a very useful little tool. But that tip for the machine is equally applicable to the larger machines as well. They all have this space at the front to cater for the ruler base. So the actual quilt depth you've got on the Moxie is 11 inches, and on the Amara, for example, it's over 16 inches. It's 16.5 inches of actual quilting space. So let's have a look at some of the common issues that particularly new users have. And I've threaded this machine up and everything looks perfect. Everything's gone through exactly where it should have gone through. I've got everything stitched correctly. I know that the needle's in correctly. So let's do some stitching and see what happens. I haven't tested this in advance, by the way. Let me just see. I don't know if you can see what's going on here. Let me just move the camera. So I'll do the usual picking up of the bobbin thread, do a few stitches, that all looks reasonable, doesn't it? Nothing looks wrong really with that stitching at all. Although, as somebody who's familiar with these machines, it didn't sound quite right to me, and sound is a really important thing, actually, with these machines. As you get experienced with your machine, you will get to know when the bobbin's running out, just because of the sound. The very experienced user of the machine that I was with yesterday, with her 37.5 million stitches, says that she can tell when the tension is right just by the sound, which is not a skill that I've picked up yet. So let's have a little look at this stitching. See if I can get it closer for you. Right, there we go. Stitching looks okay there. Let's have a look on the underside. Oh dear. Right, so we've got a huge, great nest of thread on the underside here. So that would be a bit unfortunate, wouldn't it, if you discovered that on your real quilt. And the cause of that, as many of you will know, is that we haven't got the thread, intentionally in this case, I haven't got the thread fully engaged between the tension discs here. You really have to pull that thread up on both sides of the tension disc, and this applies to any of the Handy Quilter machines. And if you don't, the result is what you've just seen on the back of this quilt. And it would be very unfortunate, wouldn't it, if you only discovered that after you'd done a fair amount of stitching. So I'm now going to fully engage that thread in the tension discs. I've got some nice Primo Soft thread on here today. And just pick up on the stitching again. And all of a sudden, look on the underside, and it's absolutely spot on. So that is one of the most common things that we see with new owners. So let me just move that. I'm going to have a quick look at the comments as well. So yes, Sandra says, isn't it also possible to set a laser guide on the side of the frame like they're used in construction? Yes, you certainly can, Sandra, and I've seen one or two of our customers that have done that, so that also works. So what she's talking about, let me just move this closer and then I can perhaps see the comments at the same time. Yeah, you can set up like a builder's laser that you can buy on one side of the frame here, and it will shine a light all the way across the quilt here and enable you to see where the end of the stitching is. But in my experience, once you get familiar with your machine and your frame, you don't need that visual reference. So it's only something you tend to need if you've got a new machine or you're fairly inexperienced with the machine. So that's one of the things that is probably the most common issue. So let's go through some other ones. Now, I have to be a bit careful with this one, but I was at a customer where she was having stitching issues, And it was caused by the fact that she hadn't pushed the needle right to the top so that it touched the needle bar. And again, everything looks right. I've just adjusted that, by the way. And what I'm hoping is that I haven't over-adjusted it, because clearly if the needle is too low, it's going to strike the bobbin case or the bobbin hook, which probably won't be a good thing. So I'm just cautiously going to do a needle down, needle up. So it's not striking the bobbin case, but I have deliberately not pushed that needle right up. So let's just see what happens. Or see if that's had any impact on the stitching. Actually, that's still looking okay. So maybe I was a little over cautious there, but I don't want to overdo this. Let me try again, cautiously. It still doesn't seem too bad, actually. It's very interesting. These machines, they really are very tolerant of things. Now, I'm going to adjust that slightly more. But actually, although even if your timing is slightly out, actually, often the machine just works perfectly fine. It might not work in every direction that you sew, but it will probably still work just fine in most cases. Right, so I've really moved that needle quite a lot here, to the extent that I can actually push. Try not to make you motion sick here, but look, I've got a small screwdriver here, and I'm pushing that. There's a sighting hole at the top of the needle. I should not be able to do that, because the needle itself should be pushed right up against the needle bar, and that stops that happening. But even though I've moved that by 2.5, 3 millimeters, the stitching is still looking fine here, and even on the underside, the stitching is looking fine. So it's not doing quite what I wanted it to do. It's just showing me how tolerant the machine is. But in fact, a likely consequence of the needle being too low is that the loop that's formed by the top thread is in the wrong place at the wrong time for the hook that's coming around, and you will very often get broken threads, shredded threads, because the hook, instead of going through the loop of the thread, it's actually hitting the thread itself and cutting it. So you'll often get shredded thread in that case. So isn't that interesting? I have there moved that needle quite a lot, but it was still stitching fine. Right, I've put the needle back up again now. There we go. But I am going to just adjust something else. So I've got a small magnet here. Let me just put this so that you can see what's going on. Right, so we use a small, hit the wrong button there, and I think that there was a pause. And so I've got a magnet here that I'm putting on the groove at the front of the needle, and that shows me that the needle is in correctly, because this is pointing directly towards me in the 6 o'clock position, which is where it should be. But let me change that. And let's see what happens. Again, I haven't tested this in advance. Let's see what happens. That's miles out. That's pointing at almost 3 o'clock. So let's see what happens in this situation. Don't tell me it's going to behave again. That is still stitching. That is still stitching fine. Isn't that amazing? So although, look at that needle, it's at about 3:30 rather than the 6 o'clock position, and yet it's still sewing. So don't think that if you have the needle at 6 o'clock or 5:30 or 6:30, it really shouldn't make that much difference. If the settings are all correct on your machine and the machine is well timed, it really shouldn't cause an issue. Whoops, just dropped my little tool here. What will cause an issue, definitely, and this is another common thing that we see, if I'm going to turn the needle even further now, it's almost in the wrong way around. Now what's going to happen? Ooh, okay. There was a bit of a nasty sound there, and the thread broke. That is definitely not going to work. But you saw that there was quite a degree of latitude there before we had a problem. Right, set that up again. It's broken my thread too. So now I've deliberately left out one of the thread guides. See what happens here. But the needle is back in the correct position now. You never thread the needle when you're on live TV. Oh, that's because I said there was a bad noise. We've actually broken the needle here. I need a new needle. Now, okay, well, that's an interesting one, isn't it? So I turned the needle until it was completely in the wrong place, and I've got a totally broken needle here. Look. There's no eye, there's no point to the needle at all here. So, one question is, where's the other side of where's the point of the needle? Because you don't want it to be caught down in your bobbin hook area. So the first thing I would do in this situation is to have a good look inside the bobbin hook area. You might struggle to find the tip of that needle. I would certainly look for it, use a magnet to see if you can find it. Check in here, brush in here. But what I would definitely do in case of a sort of catastrophic problem like that is to come to the back of the machine and turn the hand wheel just to make sure that the bobbin hook is turning freely. Because if the tip of the needle has got caught in such a way that it's stopping the bobbin hook moving, then clearly we're going to have a problem. But it's not, it's moving completely fine. So there we are. I've had a catastrophic event with a broken needle, but I'm pretty certain actually everything is going to be fine still. I don't want you trying this at home, by the way. What I do need now is a new needle. Just bear with me. I'll have a look at see if there's any questions on here. But putting in the needle the wrong way around is another of the common errors. Not necessarily with new quilters either. You can think you've got the needle in the wrong way around, but if it's 180 degrees wrong, you won't be able to stitch. Okay, so I'm going to simulate the next thing here. I've got a new needle. I should be able to thread it better now that I've actually got an eye in the needle. There we go. Right, let's have a look. Nikki, hi, good to see you. Anne, do you come over here often then, Anne? I think you've got family here, haven't you? Oh, Sean, I haven't heard from you for a while, I don't think, Sean. You're one of those good people who gets your machine serviced regularly, bringing it here. Oh gosh, Sally in Fife says it's getting dark up in Scotland. Right, so what we've got now is a new needle. Now I would be very cautious, even though I've checked for the needle and I haven't found anything and I've checked the hand wheel and everything is turning correctly, I will still be very cautious when I first try to use the machine. So there we are, I've picked up the bobbin thread. Now let's see what's going to happen here. Ooh, right. No stitching happening really there at all. I've got a couple of long stitches, it's not forming proper stitches at all. And the reason is I've missed out a really key part of the thread path. Intentionally, I'll just come around here. You can just about see it. There's the take-up lever. Now that's the lever that pulls the thread up after the loop has been formed. This lever moves up quickly and pulls up the top thread to form the stitch. So if you miss out this one, this is probably the most critical of all, then the machine just isn't going to stitch. So I'm going to have to rethread that machine here. So in terms of where do you start if you have a stitching problem, my first port of call would always be, is my thread loaded correctly? Have I missed out an element in my thread path? And don't think that just because you're an experienced user of the machines that that isn't the case. If you call us for help, that'll still be the first thing that we ask you to check. Have a look at the thread path first. Make sure it's properly flossed in the tension discs. And I haven't actually created a good stitch, of course, since the needle broke. So let me just establish if that's the case. Okay, this is another check that I always do. So I've picked up a bobbin thread here. Whenever I pick up the bobbin thread, get rid of that. So here's the bobbin thread. Whenever I pick up the bobbin thread, I always tug on it because it should pull through very easily. And I'm pulling on this and it's really tight. So there's no point me trying to stitch here because I know it's not going to work. And I don't know what the cause of that is, but it's not correct. So I'm definitely not going to try and start to stitch until I've solved that problem. So what I would do in this situation is to take the bobbin case out and have a look. What's going on here? Right, I've dropped the bobbin in the process. But what had happened is that the bobbin thread had got caught up. So that's a really good check. In fact, there are two checks that I do whenever I thread the machine and get ready to start stitching. The first one is to pull the thread at this point here and to feel if there's sufficient tension on there. There is a decent amount of tension on these machines, and if you haven't flossed properly between those tension discs, it will feel very loose, so you'll know straight away that there's something wrong even before you try to start stitching. So that's the first thing I do, and the second thing I do is what I've just been explaining, is always to see if that bobbin thread is pulled up nice and easily. So, and it's not. I've tried again and it's not picked it up. So, you see, I'm making a bit of a pickle for myself here, but this is like a real life situation, isn't it? Oh look, I can see there's lots of bits of thread caught in the bobbin case area here. Look at the mess I've got here. There we are. There's lots of top thread that's caught up in the bobbin hook area. Now, we're never going to get a good stitch until we've sorted that out. Don't know if I can do that one-handed. Just have a look. And this applies, of course, to all the machines. It could be, in a situation like this, that you might not be able to get that thread out. That's actually fixed quite solid. Oh, this is like being on Blue Peter, isn't it? And, you know, never work with children or animals in a live situation. But actually, this is showing you a real life situation, isn't it? This might happen. So what I'm going to do here is to take the needle plate off with a small screwdriver, because I can't clear that thread easily, and I've got to make sure there are no bits of thread caught that's going to impede the formation of the stitch. I'm fairly sure also now, if I went to the back of the machine and tried to turn the hand wheel, it would feel quite tough. It's not actually feeling too bad, so it's not caught up too badly in there. Let's take off that. There we are. I'll try and get a bit of a close-up so that you can see what's going on here. So there we are. We've got some top thread that's tangled up in here. And until we have released that and got that out of the bobbin hook, we're not going to be able to stitch properly. Now it looks as if I've got all of that thread out. Can't do it one-handed. But I will now go and turn the hand wheel and have a look at the bobbin hook area just to see if I can see any more bits of thread. It only needs a tiny piece of thread in there and it will impede the stitch formation. That's looking okay. What I would generally do now is to oil the machine hook whilst I've got this all open. But let's put this back. So don't forget, whilst I'm doing this, we still have our 10% off all Glide thread, Primo Soft thread, Glisten thread, Magna Soft bobbins, Magna Glide Classic bobbins, all Glide products. 10% off for the whole of the month of December, with the exception of our thread collections, which are 20% off. So if you can find a set of 9,000 meter threads that you like, that's still the most economical way to purchase them. But if you want individual colours, 10% off this month. And that will be applied automatically when you place your order at handyquilter.co.uk, which is our shopping site. Getting a very dry mouth. I hadn't realised, doing all this talking. I'm going to have to try not to talk so much this week because I shocked myself last week by talking too much. And I thought this week it would be a bit of a struggle because I've got nothing planned. But here we go. Right, bobbin case back in. Check the bobbin case. Let's do that. Same two tests again. Just make sure tension on the top thread here. Bring up the bobbin thread. Hopefully we solve the problem now. Pull that bobbin thread and it's flowing through nice and freely. So I'm pretty sure we're okay here now. I'll just check that. Here we are. We're away. So there we go. It's just a question of going through a process of elimination, starting with the easy things first. It's just like any sort of problem solving. You should always start with the easy thing first. It's tempting to think, oh no, I've broken the needle. Something catastrophic has happened. My timing is going to be completely messed up. Even with breaking a needle, as you've seen here, it doesn't necessarily mean that anything really bad has happened. In fact, it certainly hadn't in this case. Right, other common issues, particularly with frames, in fact only with frames. We've got our gear mechanism here where we can tighten our back fabric and our top fabric, and the ratchet mechanism means that we can just keep tightening up. You do not want this top fabric to be too tight. Now, I'm deliberately doing it too tight here, and I might not see a problem. But having the fabric too tight on your frame tends to cause more problems than having it too loose. So let's come back here. By the way, although I've got the Pro Stitcher Lite on this machine, I'm just using it in free motion mode here. Quick swig of water, excuse me. Fabric too tight, not good. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to a larger stitch, just for demonstration purposes. Now, if we've got the fabric really tight, and then you stitch it together, and then you release the tension, chances are you're going to end up with your final quilt with puckers in it, either on the top side or the underside, and certainly your stitches are not going to be well formed. You tend also to get skipped stitches if you have your fabric too tight. Don't forget also, when you're moving the quilt on, always tighten your backing fabric pole first, and then your top fabric, your quilt top. Make sure that there are no puckers in the underside on your backing fabric, and then you'll be happy. But I can see, although that has stitched, it's not a nice looking stitch, that, you know. I'm sure you won't be able to tell on there, but because it was too tight to start with, it's a very flat looking stitch, but the tension is right on here. So that is something to look out for. Another thing that can happen, I'm going to simulate something else here. You can see that stitch regulation is working fine, but suddenly it's not working fine in this direction. It's working fine horizontally, but not vertically. So that tells me that one of the encoder cables is not plugged in correctly. They vary from machine to machine where they're plugged in, but you've got wheels that run along the back track and along the side track that communicate to the machine through a couple of cables. If they get pulled out slightly, it happened here on the course recently actually, where the cable got caught up against something, got pulled out, and therefore the stitch regulation wasn't working. Happens really quite commonly. So here we are. Glad to see it only doesn't happen to me, says Sean. No, it happens to everybody, Sean. Happens to us all sometimes. Yes, it certainly does. Okay. Incidentally, on the Moxie, if you get a warning symbol coming up on the front screen, a sort of lightning strike symbol, it usually means that you've got thread caught up in the bobbin case area. Louise, right, I just happened to be behind the camera here. Louisa says, my thread keeps slipping out of the bobbin. What do you mean by that? No, I haven't covered that at all, actually, Louise. When you say it's slipping out of the bobbin, you mean it comes out of the notch and gets caught up around the centre of the bobbin? Have a look. Maybe it's an opportunity just to talk a little bit about bobbin issues. So, I don't know, Louise, are you suggesting that the thread jumps out of the eye here? Exactly that. Okay. Right. The first thing I would check, Louise, is the backlash spring, I think. There's my backlash spring in here. You will have one of these more modern backlash springs. I've got a video on YouTube showing you how to refit it. It's possible that that's not properly seated, I guess. Also, what is the tension on your bobbin? You could have issues because of how tight your bobbin is wound. Even if it's a pre-wound, this is a pre-wound, it's actually quite tight, this one, but if it's too loose, if you wound your own bobbins, or even with pre-wounds we get ones that are wound much too loosely, it's possible that is causing the thread to come out of that. I have to say, I don't know really what other cause there can be for that. Check you've got your tension right. This one's a little bit too loose, possibly. If anybody watching has got an idea as to why that might happen on a regular basis, I don't know of any others apart from... oh, look, it's me showing my balding head. I have to be careful of that, don't I? Right. Yeah, Louise, I'm not sure. I'm not sure, really. Check the tension on your bobbin. check your backlash spring. I think they're the two obvious things to look for. So, here we are. I'll mention one other thing here. There is a temptation to, if you've got a very thick quilt, and you think, oh, the presser foot is going to be too low, do not be tempted to change the height of the presser foot. It's set and it's on a spring mechanism, so really it can cope with almost any thickness. So you see, if you've got a thick quilt, that just bounces up and down anyway, so it really doesn't matter. If you set your foot height too high, again, you'll have stitch problems. You'll get skip stitches and all sorts. These things are set by us when we do a service or when we check the machines before they go out to customers. And you should never have to adjust the height of your foot. Never. So there we go. The only other thing I was going to quickly talk about, because I've been chuntering again for far too long, it's very good for new users if you are checking or practicing your free motion. Chalk pencil is a very useful thing. And if I just draw some lines here, for example, or you could do a grid. It's a very good way of practicing your free motion, whatever it might be. Let me just set up here. Gosh, it must be so much easier for Liz to have a cameraman who does this all automatically. There we are. Yes, Trish has talked about thread getting caught under the outside spring on the bobbin case. That's true. That's not something I mentioned, but you should check from time to time. But I'm not sure if that would cause the thread to come out of the eye of the bobbin case that Louise was describing. It will give you stitch issues for sure. So if you are practicing your free motion quilting, you might typically have just a plain piece of fabric. You've got no reference points. On a real quilt, you've obviously normally got reference points. But if you draw on some references, either with parallel lines or grids, they can help give some structure to your practice. And what I always recommend to people is to practice what you doodle. As I mentioned, I think last week, whenever we have a top teacher here, there's an awful lot of drawing that goes on. Because if you practice things on paper before you get to the machine, it's remarkable how much that improves things. And if you're very good at doing your ribbon candy in this direction, yeah, that's great, but sometimes your ribbon candy needs to be in this direction. So don't forget you have to practice in different directions. You see, I'm not so good at doing that one, but I do suggest that you practice a doodle that you doodle if you've got a piece of pen and paper, and what's your go-to doodle? And in fact, for me, it is ribbon candy. But if you give yourself some reference lines, I put that a bit too close to the bar, actually. I'm hitting the bar. Or with your grids, there's lots of things you can practice with your grids. But to have that structure makes such a difference, you know. Now, this is why I don't... There we are. Really poor effort. I'm not practiced enough. So, there we are. I have not got anything else planned to talk about, I think, for this afternoon. Rosemary in Suffolk keeps having her feed freezing. That's very annoying, isn't it? Probably to do with your rural broadband, I suspect, Rosemary. So, which is a problem that we have here as well. And don't get me started on mobile phone signals. Really, around here it's awful. It's an absolute shocker. Let me just check on here. So Myri says that she occasionally gets an extra loop caught up in the pigtail. That causes a tangle on a new pass. Are you talking, Myri, about this this pigtail guide here? It is possible for the thread to get caught up around there, in which case certainly it's going to tighten things up and you're going to get a real mess with your stitching. What else have we got? Yes, okay. You're right. If anything goes wrong with your stitching, really check that thread path first, always. And Myri's right, I've seen the thread get caught around here. It can even get caught around this little screw here occasionally. But first port of call is always your thread path. Anything missed out is likely to cause a problem. So I think that's about me done, really. I've mentioned that we've got our X-Demo Amaras, still a couple of those left. We've got Glide Thread discount still on, great. And we've still got a few of the Glide Thread cards. So if you spend over £100 of Glide products, we'll send you a Glide shade card as well, because we haven't got the new cards in with the 96 new colours on them yet. They haven't been produced by Filtech just at the moment. And the other thing to mention is that we probably won't be online next Friday at all, which is why I was keen to get back to do this one today, because next Friday happens to be my birthday, so we're taking a day off, which probably means that we won't do a Facebook Live. I don't know what Liz has got planned, who knows? So we'll see what we do there. Last year when I mentioned it was my birthday coming up, one of my customers very kindly sent me a birthday card. Now, I haven't mentioned this so that you send me a birthday card. I don't expect birthday cards at all. Thank you. I'm just telling you so that you know that probably we're not going to be online next Friday. But thank you for your patience. But when we're back, you'll be very pleased to hear, I'm sure, the face of Pinhole Quilting, Liz, will be back on screen. But thanks for your patience, and I hope there's maybe just a little something that you have picked up from today that will turn out to be useful. Much appreciate you watching. Thanks. Bye.